mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair of the New Urbanism Division, and I am your webcast moderator. Today, July 7th, we will hear the presentation, Placemaking and Public Art. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call the 1-800 number shown in bold. For your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box, again located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. We will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2017. Thanks to all the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. If you're looking down the list and you don't see your chapter or division listed, we ask that you reach out to them and suggest that they join us. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Urban Design and Preservation Division, which we will hear a little bit more about in just a moment. So thanks to Urban Design and Preservation for sponsoring today's webcast. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. You can register for these by visiting our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, just head over to planning.org and log into your My APA account. And then under the CM log, you can search for CM activities and then type either the event number or today's webcast title, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And this webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, and you can check those out again on our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our goings-on. And we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. Now I'd like to turn it over to Margaret Rifkin from the Urban Design Division.
Hi, this is Margaret Rifkin. I'm on the Urban Design and Preservation team, and I hope you'll join our division and perhaps create one of our future webinars. We are, can we get the next slide, Chris? Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm moving it along.
Oh, great, thank you. In addition to today's webinar, we have 2 more coming up this year. As you can see, one on smartphone photography and one on path as place. Next slide, please. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today, Paula Reese, who is the principal of Forcier. She's best known for her ability to create lasting connections between large urban environments and the people who use them. She has expertise in the historic patterns of public spaces and marketplaces, which is a wonderful overlap with what urban design and historic preservation planners are interested in. She has done award-winning work, and it's been featured in many publications on environmental design and urban identities. Paula has her own multidisciplinary design firm in Seattle, which she began in 1980. Her degree is in fine arts, and she says she had an interest in theater and world religions, which for those of you who are insightful can see a direct connection to the whole concept of placemaking. She says that she was overwhelmed and inspired to solve the vast gap between the marketing messages of the development teams that she works with and what they were planning to create and what actually ended up being built. And we can all sympathize with that, knowing that we often start with great visions and are wondering what happened at the end of the day. So part of Paula Reese's charge and her inspiration, her interest is in helping make that connection between the big vision and the end result. With that, I'm very happy to introduce Paula Reese.
I'm going to say good morning because I'm in Seattle, but good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for being here and sharing today. This is my favorite thing to talk about. I'm super passionate about creating great places, and I think in our world today, this is a tremendous need, and I'm sure most of you work at this same need, and so it's nice to be talking to the choir. One of the things that we start out with is that we identify with our clients that space plus people is actually what creates place. And that may seem pretty basic, but when you think about it, it's the people that are often missing from the process of creating a great place. If you look at the word space, you can see some of the associations in the thesaurus. But if you look at the richness of the word place, there's so many more opportunities for what we can touch and how we can influence making great experiences. One of the ways we like to talk about this is to say that place is providing lasting and community-based environments. I'm sure many of you have probably read this book. It's a favorite of mine. I wish I was able to have been taught by this gentleman. One of the things that he says is that experience shares a common root with experiment and with expert. I really enjoy that quote because that's what I think we're supposed to be doing in creating places, is create the experience, which is probably what people are looking for in context to what we normally are getting with just sitting at our computer screens or being on our iPhones. In his book, he talks about space as movement and then place as pause. And that connects a great deal with my philosophy in that I'm hoping that people will come to the places that we create and will pause and feel a connection for what they're looking for. And so I'm going to ask each of you, you're sitting in different places all over today, to imagine when you think of the place where you live or the place where you work, what kind of image comes into your head. I want you to hold that image, and then I want you to consider another image of why you would live in the place that you do. For me, in Seattle, this is the view from the window in the evenings of my office, and this is why I end up traveling a great deal and asking myself, why the heck am I on airplanes so often? But it's to come back to this. And the second image that I have about the place where I live is my own backyard. So I'm curious, when you thought about these two images, if, as I was showing you, you had sort of a macro view of place and then a micro view of your place, if it became more personal. And we could talk about that in the Q&A. Another thing that I believe is the purpose of my firm is to protect beauty and to create beauty, because we get used to ugly. That's a quote by a friend of mine who says, we get used to ugly. And I think that's sort of the case. We stop seeing what's around us. And also, as people who are creating great places, it is this experience that we have to be concerned with. But you know, breathing is an experience. So what do we mean when we say we're going to create an experience? One of the symbols I like to look at, and what I tell our clients, is that there's a lot of linear, what I call the I, that's in the development process. It's the spreadsheets, it's the grids of the roads, it's just a process that is step by step. And what we bring in is the O, which I think is the more organic, and it's to round and it's to soften and get back to the connection of people. If you look at the I and the O, it represents some of the people who like to point and are more linear. They probably enjoy wayfinding more. They're probably more about pathfinding and order, a little bit more scientific point of view, and maybe you could say more of the left brain. But some people really like to project. They like to create the place and tell stories. They actually enjoy random chaos. They probably are a little more intuitive, and they're probably a little bit more right-brained. Then you look at the I and the O, or the 1 and the 0, as a digital influence. And speaking of digital, I would say that most of the people who are involved today in this business of placemaking have become pretty much seduced by the idea that surfaces are all going to become very, very active, moving. And the question that I have is if everything is bright, active, and moving, then where does our attention go? And this is a wonderful video. If you go onto Vimeo, it's a Japanese artist that just does a great piece called Hyper Reality, and you really should watch this. It's an incredible visual piece that he's built about having every surface of our environment covered with digital. And speaking of digital, I really think that people should be first, and so what we look at is taking often very suburban locations, and as things are densifying, we try to remove the sub from it, move toward the urban, and add the E, which is to be more urbane. And for us, being urbane is adding the humane aspect to urban. And if you also look at that definition, it means being a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more polished, refined. So what's the truth today? Well, we're bored, we have little trust, and we have to pee. And when I say that, what I'm trying to say is if we create great places, we have to think about all the aspects of who we are as human beings and what we're offering to make our visitors and guests comfortable. And when we're bored, the products that we have today, we maybe wait for the new announcement for an Apple product, or who knows, but we're not easily entertained anymore. So there's very little that keeps us into an experience. We also don't understand economic value as well. We don't trust our money right now. And we certainly don't trust our corporations. And we don't know how to define value. For instance, when you go on Amazon, if the book's just released and it says that the list price is $27.95, but you can buy it the same day it releases for $18.45, or maybe you can get it on your Kindle for $10.45, what is the actual value of the thing that you're purchasing? And when we look at creating places, we know that it has to be a balance of both the light and the dark. That if you try to create a place that's only about light, then you get Disneyland. If you add the shadow and you allow the tires to get kicked, then you get a real place. It's in balance. One of the things we find in the requests we get from our clients is that today we're actually filling in the gaps. We're going back in and we're seeing strip shopping centers get torn down, rebuilt into new mixed urban environments that have greater density and greater use and less emphasis on the parking lot. So what is this place built for, and what are the people looking for? And what's it going to become? We're super interested in the pedestrian scale. Things lower, more details, more things reaching out into the street, better landscaping, better lighting, and also a sense of place, of how we embed stories and history into making the place really its own. And landmarking, the big gestures to say, come over here. This is a favorite quote of mine. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. And I really believe until you name something, it doesn't really exist or develop its character. It's just as if you have a child, until you really decide what you're going to call that child, it doesn't come into its own. And you may nickname it, and then it grows into something else. But it's important that we call things what it is that we intend. Another thing is most people think that, for instance, if you're doing wayfinding or you're creating a place, that it's all about efficiency. But we would argue that really the intelligent thing is there's always going to be something that's in the way. And to move about, maybe the best way to move people through an experience is a little bit more delightful. I've always been curious, as somebody who was a painter and loves color, why we seem to be so chromophobic when we get to developments and into selecting building colors. So we're often asked to do that kind of work. It's one of my favorite things to do. I also believe that the sidewalks are the bones. This is a great sidewalk. It's actually Sunset Boulevard. But if you look at it, the scale of the signs are down low. The landscaping is hugging both the curbside and obstructing some of the meters. You've got cafe zone. And I also believe sign bans are death. When you try to regulate how storefronts and signages should be, you don't get the kind of character that is of the places that we love to reference, for instance, in Europe, where things are what I call bouncing. They're moving up and down in the pedestrian scale to actually relate to the people who are there. And human scale is the basis of everything that we look at is, you know, what's the great width of a sidewalk or a street? What's the great width of a retail experience? And I think that there's a real reason why some of your better boutiques and some of your smaller stores and some of the places that we love, you see sort of these modules off of the 15 and 16 foot bay width, ceiling heights, sidewalk width. And I kind of think it gets back to the aura or the space of community or two people being able to pass each other in space easily. Another thing that's sort of interesting is the old notion of living above the store, and that a bay width of a store modular was often around 15 feet because the wood structure to build that space, structurally the logs and the timber were 15 feet. I also, in thinking a great deal about how places communicate, have come up with a philosophy that the smaller the sign, the better the quality. If you think about some of your big box stores, your Targets, Kmart's, Walmart's, the signs are huge. But if you think about a lot of the stores that carry the better quality, you can see that the signs become smaller. If you're traveling down Fifth Avenue in New York, often the sign may not be bigger than 2 inches, and it's usually at pedestrian level first. Another thing that we believe in is in mixed use. The designers that don't have a retail experience or don't care to shop shouldn't be designing the street. I think that streets should be designed by people who love to shop and that we should keep the designers above the street that don't care about it. This is a retail space that I just really loved. It was designed by Streetworks, and it's a jewelry store, but I thought the way that the planter boxes came out onto the sidewalk, and also that above the storefront there was a relight or space for more planting to hanging down over that storefront, and the way that the entry was kicked back as it used to be in another time. And when I talk with various designers of the street, I often get into an argument with a lot of architects saying that the street level or the pedestrian level of creating a place should mimic the structural monumentality of the building above. And I just show them, again, photographs of Paris, or an indication that often the building at street level over a period of time morphs and doesn't follow the structural pattern, and you have absolutely no sense that the building's going to fall over because the ground level has changed over time. And also that urban retail should be messy too. It doesn't need to be all perfect and everything always clean and tidy. This can just be as interesting as anything else. I also believe that public landmarks should not have naming rights. I have been on so many properties where we have seen something significant sold to a tenant, only to have that tenant merge with somebody else or go away or become something else. And it really messes with the community sense of place to plaster landmarks with branding. One of the things I'm most interested in now is this idea of place or media. A lot of people will say, well, I don't want our city to be like Blade Runner, but in truth, I think actually our places are becoming worse than Blade Runner when most of our sidewalk or public space is being owned by advertising. For instance, this poses as a phone booth when there actually isn't a phone in it. And this was a digital billboard across from the Pike Place Market here in Seattle, and they called to ask, what can we do about this? And basically, because of zoning, there's nothing you can do about it. When I was working on Sunset Boulevard, what I realized is that they were asking us to come in and help activate the street and make it safer because there was high crime and various things going on, and they wanted it to be pedestrian friendly. But these tall walls, which are 20 stories tall and change every 4 weeks and create their own sense of place, were dominating the buildings, and the sides of the buildings could make so much money just off of the advertising deal that the buildings were dark and didn't have tenants in them, so it became a structure for the tall walls. And my feeling about that is if you're going to do that, then you need to figure out some way to tax it so that the community gets something back, and that's what certainly happened here. When we talk about art and media, this is a beautiful mural by an artist that was reflecting the industrial cranes of the waterfront, but Starbucks decided to go over the art with their own art and make their own advertisement. And so I've been working with the city here to try to figure out how to not allow people to take over our visual space unless they're contributing to something like paying for street improvements or some sort of taxation, but usually billboards don't have any tax and they don't pay more than a sign permit. This was how they were doing that advertisement, as they were saying that you could buy a coupon for Starbucks coffee in this location. And so this is the kind of stuff I look for in zoning and codes to try to improve on and make sure everybody's paying their fair share. So I created a group called Keep Washington Beautiful, and a group of us testify to protect our scenic highways and places in Olympia during our legislation, and also Keep Seattle Beautiful, where we do the same thing. We watch for legislation and go talk to our council members. And when we're working on place, we like to unearth the real history and dig deep about what the place is about. So for instance, right now we're working in Coconut Grove, and it's no surprise that if you start digging and digging, you see some of the early maps, and they will call it the Grove, and here's the Grove. Or you ask, well, what really happened in an area that's not developing well? And this was in Tacoma, Washington, and what we discovered was that the area that wasn't developing well was last where the Chinese that built the railroad had their community. And at one point, there was just a horrible situation where they were run out. And until we did a park and tried to get past the negativity of that event, that space wasn't going to redevelop, but today it is. And then reframing the story. For instance, we always write a book about every project before we start of our intentions. And this was a book we wrote in Cleveland of building bridges between the East and the West so that people would travel between these two different parts of the city and not have old perceptions about what was what. I also like to have fun. I'd love to do this sign called "No parking citations will be given in this space" because we're so impressed you found the spot. We wouldn't think of giving you a ticket. Also, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for sensuality, the senses. And I believe that sensuality and service rule the success of great places more than buildings do. And then where should we meet? This was a photograph taken from my previous office the day after 9/11. And what's really interesting about this photograph is that nobody said to meet at this part of the city, but people knew and wanted to come together in their confusion, and they came to this place, and this is the actual place where the Christmas tree it appears every year. So when we go into new situations, we always try to find where is that heart for that place? What do people think of as being the center? And we know that if we can help make that heart healthy, that it's going to pump out an energy to the rest of the place. Another question that's interesting to think about is, well, how far will people walk? And if you think about, like in Paris, the Champs-Élysées is actually a mile long and back, and very few people do the whole walk. And then how easy is it to be there? Does it look like this, or does it look like this? And also being transaction-based versus being relationship-based. I think in creating people coming to spaces, we need to think more about the relationship than the transaction. Another thing I like to tell our clients is that really great places are not really something you can formulate. They're often very emotional, they're very organic, and they're difficult to predict. I also believe that a real place is not a brand. And what's interesting is even Roy Disney quit the board of directors being allergic to the idea of branding because it just simplified too much of something that he wanted to be a real experience. So when you think about communities and you go into some of your favorite areas, like for instance, when we're working around Washington, D.C., and I go into Georgetown or I go into Alexandria, you don't see a big monumental sign that says you just entered Georgetown or Alexandria. What happens is all of the details start coming together. And when you think about branding, it was really to burn some sort of symbol or representation to distinguish your cattle from something else. But actually, somebody who's a maverick, Samuel Maverick, he was independently minded, and he didn't brand his cattle, and that's how he knew his cattle, is they were the ones that didn't have the brand. You also hear sort of this ubiquitous word about being authentic, and this was what I encountered in Hong Kong. It's Peruvian flute players that were dressed up in First Nation costumes standing in front of an H&M bikini billboard. And when you see that, you have to go, what the heck? What is authentic about this experience? Also, when I was in Hong Kong, I went up to see the beautiful Buddha on the top of the mountain and took this gorgeous tram up there, and you could hear the birds singing, and you were over the water, and you're going up to this very spiritual experience, and you get off of the tram, and the first thing you see is a Starbucks coffee. Or when we went to Tulum in Mexico, my husband and I were very excited to see the ruins, but when we got there, we had to park in a parking lot, and the first thing we saw was a Subway sandwich. A friend of mine was hiking and was in Tanzania, and he got to this high point after a couple of days, and there was a Coca-Cola stand. And so another question we ask is, why are things like farmers markets all the rage? When you think about it, we used to experience our grocer and the thing that we were buying as being fresh or being something that you could actually tangibly smell, see, have that central experience with. And so that's kind of what we're looking for with the farmer's market, is a connection to where did it come from instead of what has become this package age. And when you think about it, there's 47,000 brands in a grocery store. So we're looking for an experience that's different than that. Another part of our business is wayfinding. And people think wayfinding is signage, but actually this is wayfinding. When I went to this place, they said go down the highway and you'll turn left when you see the big white gate or portal. But this is another kind of wayfinding. So I think every community needs to decide what kind of experience they're looking for. I think this is a beautiful kind of wayfinding where the historic district changes its sign names to be the black and white with the beautiful flowers in Portland, Oregon. Another thing is, what is your sign? I really think that blade signs are very important to creating a distinguished street and a place. And you can even tell tenants to sort of get with the place. And it doesn't have to just be an experience going one direction. It could be a completely different experience going the other direction on the same information. I love this quote by Stuart Brand that all buildings are predictions and all predictions are wrong. And also clients get very impatient about how long it's going to take to actually build something that's a real place. And I like his diagram here about how long it took to build this particular building, hundreds of years. We also like to say that poop happens. Basically, you have to deal with everything when you're dealing with creating a great place. So you just figure out how to address it. We have signs that actually say, please keep on the lawn instead of keep off the lawn. And we believe every inch counts. This is a little coffee shop that's in one bay of one Banana Republic window, and it becomes the best place for all the bike couriers to hang out. So I'm going to go very quickly and show you how we create places. In reimagining a retail strategy for Tacoma, Washington, you can look at an alleyway, and this is how it was before, just a little paint, a couple great signs. That's how it is after. We showed other tenants how you could do this. This was one of the better jewelry stores, but we just took the same sign, moved it down to pedestrian level, repositioned, made the windows better, and painted it and placed an awning and some flowers in the front. This was the historic museum for the state. Had a great bookstore right inside that arched window, but you'd never notice it, so we told them to move it outside. This is one of the better boutiques, but again, even when you're going down the street, you can't see it. So what we did is we gave it some more punch, some landscape, some awning, some lighting. Another building right across from where they have the Christmas tree, made it a little bit more attractive. The design store, cleaned it up. The train station, turned it inside out. And these are some projects that just show you how we do some of the same thing with what we're designing. I'm very proud of this project. It won an International Design Award, but I'm showing you a sign that literally the eggs I bought at a display costume place for $3 a piece had an artist transform them to look like they were Shaker wood products, and then I bought the letters right off of a shelf. So this whole thing probably cost less than maybe $400 or $500. Color, shades, transit systems, art on public information, art on top of public landmarks, custom alphabets for places, sidewalk embeds, art inside of rotundas. And then I'm going to go quickly through a project in California, Santana Row, where we actually touch all the addresses. We do art and found objects, brought a cathedral, small vestibule door over from Barcelona, as well as a fountain. Bought some doors in Tanzania, or in Tunisia, and built the surrounds and the steps to look old, to frame them on a wall that had a bunch of meters. Awnings, canopies, movement, relief work. The garlic is a farm product of the area, embeds in the architecture, establish good cafe zones here, inboard and outboard on the sidewalk. Change the textures of the sidewalk. This is one of the first parklets in the Bay Area, done in early 90s. And then again, we get involved with color. Landscape, here's some artists' custom mosaic pots from the area. Trellis work up the building. We work with the landscape architects to talk about the color of the planting, the pacing, the shape, even benches as found objects from France. Even the loading docks. Lighting, for instance, the architects picked this light fixture, but we thought it could be more dramatic and signal a better entry, so we created an archway that picked up a pattern of the leaves and just simply applied it around it. Here's a alleyway where we went and bought a bunch of eclectic lanterns and applied them to a really beautifully painted wall by a local artist. Creating our own light fixtures, and then marketing the places before they happen. We took a really horrible, old, greasy restaurant, reused the building, and turned it into quite a nice little marketing space. We ghost paint walls in the back so that they're just as interesting as the front of the property. Hiring lots of local artists. Deal with the parking signage, and also being sure that everything we're doing is always first thought of at the people scale. These trees, this is one of the most amazing things. I need to send kudos to a favorite client, Federal Realty. They picked up 14 live oak trees, nurseryed them for 3 years, and then brought them back onto the property, and it was just magnificent. People hang out around those trees as an important part of their community. Chess games in the park, fireplaces, railings, gates, the sidewalk textures, everything is considered. And then encouraging tenants to also do things as their own floor mats as you go into their stores. We named the residential products, the public spaces, and create the identities for all of that. Also, the regulatory signs, that's a brand new sign, a street sign up on the building. And even the rules and regs could, excuse me, be more interesting. In Boston, we're currently working on the second phase of Assembly Row, which is one of America's oldest industrial sites, and completely cleaned up. The Mystic River has been cleaned up by the state, and the park has been put there. And the developer has gone to outlet, but it feels like a main street, so I call it inlet. Close to Boston, it's 3 minutes across the bridge near MIT. So these are some of the assembly type graphics that we created. And then we connected the old neighborhood, which was cut off by the highway and the train tracks, to the new neighborhood by putting local artists work underneath the highway and working with the Massachusetts Highway Department to actually apply this to their concrete. Another thing that we did to create the place is the first thing is we took some of the old steel beams from the factories that used to be on this land, and we turned them into a portal that was space activated between the water of the Mystic River, the state park, and then the new property. And even in the building, we played up the works, the assembly of the project, down to security patches, column inserts. We end up purchasing a lot of the landscape details, parking, artwork again on the theater. And this was the entry to a parking garage, and it had a bunch of meters on it, so we just decided to buy more and play it up and make it into something instead of let it be as ugly as it was. Here we worked with the architects, and we actually applied the painting to the rain screen on the top levels and furnished that. Column bases, the trains used to go through this area. We also tattooed this building with the local seafood and things that were from the area. Wine bars, fire torchères. Up above you see the film reels on this large wall for the major theater that's there. We took a vacant lot next door to the construction and actually put containers and a beer brew temporary pop-up. This is an artist that we commissioned to do what we call the boats of the Mystic River, and we put that in a window space that was a blank wall between a candy store and the theater, and the lower boats are down at children's height. These are some parts and pieces of industry that we turned into a light fixture going into the park. The wheels actually move. The children can rotate the handle and make them move. These are some column inserts. There was an Edsel factory that used to be on the site. And so we took the pattern of the Edsel and actually turned it into the column and beds, as well as creating those giant light fixtures in the corridor. We'll cover up venting systems with graphics. We end up helping buy more eclectic landscape pots. Help people find their way back to their car. We even paint other people's buildings nearby so that it directs to the place. And again, loading docks. It doesn't mean just because it's a loading dock it has to be unattractive. Column bays, children's parks, inserts into the architecture with spandrel panels. This is the utility gate. We just thought instead of looking at meters, we can make it beautiful. Same thing here is put it on wheels and move it back so that we could put art next to it. Call this the infinity loop with the gears of industry. The Mayflower or Massachusetts. And even inside when we go in and do lobbies, we do the custom carpets and bring this industrial assembly feel together. Here we honored industry by looking at blacksmith tools and talking about what the local community was about. Murals by local artists, fire torchère with hieroglyphics, directional signage, nighttime staircases to parking garage. This is a brand new sign that we created to park. We also create rolling planters so that you can close the street down for a farmer's market. I found a weather vane in San Francisco, flew it to Boston to put on top of this directory, and found out that it actually had been made 100 years before, about 2 miles away from this site. So I guess the bird flew home. This is a project my husband and I just completed a couple months ago, and it's fully leased. We had a feeling after we had master planned Interbay, which is an industrial neighborhood that was fallow for 40 years near downtown Seattle, that people could live near industry, and also that industry was flexing and was something different today than it had been in the past. So we built this building that was what we call flex industry. You can see there's roll-up doors on the top level, the bottom, and sure enough, we've attracted people who were doing forensics, people who are doing robotics, a cleaner industry. And so now, where there used to be just one house in the neighborhood, there's now over 700 workforce housing apartments that we helped master plan. And so this shows somebody having an office next to what they're manufacturing. And this is the back of the building. You can see in context, it's very industrial next to the train switching yard. Pike Rose is a project that we do the placemaking for at Bethesda. And you can see the I and the O are in the name. That's the development. It's in its second phase. Here's the rose and vine. We've used muses to be sort of the symbol of what we're doing. And so one of the buildings we actually named and put the idea of music behind, and then later Strathmore, which is the music venue down the street, decided to do an alternative music location, and so they gave us their used instruments. We turned those into chandeliers, and then they leased the space on the 3rd floor and are attracting a younger audience into a club environment. That's a 15-foot tall light fixture that's shaped like a baking whisk that was purchased in Paris. This dancer in front of the music building. This is a parking garage entry that has the music theme on it, on that same building. We embedded some quotes into it. That's a 13-foot tall plaque. Your musical notes become part of the pilasters. And then we'll paint. This is going to be the back alley of one of the buildings, but we thought it doesn't need to be unattractive, so we painted some olive branches, loading dock doors. Even the staircase, it indicates through a tulip pattern to go up the stairs without saying a sign that makes people do that. There's a fireplace that we designed. The carpet in the apartments, the signage in the apartments. This is another residential unit that we call Palace, after Pallas Athena, who is the goddess of civic life, and she has the owl and spears and all kinds of symbols of weaving. The olive branch is another symbol of Pallas Athena. Weaving patterns on the sign. And then this are just some other patterns around the property, railings, signage. This is an artist's work from Sweden, 7 stories tall. I had been watching his portfolio for probably 2 decades and just finally found a project I thought was perfect for him to do the muses with music, literature, dance. It's a little park, a spitter fountain for children, where we created a storybook and characters that reflected the story of the neighborhood. This is something we're working on right now. I had an artist illustrate these muses that will be 8-foot tall sculptures embedded into the building. And then this is another piece we're working on this week, which is an artist who painted some of the birds of Bethesda. And we're testing it on a building here so that we can see if we like the painting style. This is a fountain we're creating right now with some artist tiles and also some birds that were carved and are now being cast in bronze. And so basically I'm done talking. I want to say I think the beauty is in the details. When we look at placemaking, we always consider the art and the artifacts that we can put in, including found objects. We're looking at pattern and texture, dimensionality, color, words, and thoughtful materials. And we think that people are looking for that authentic experience, so the real things that are going to truly delight them. The only way that this happens is through collaboration, and I need to thank the hundreds of people that actually work on our various projects and the team. And it couldn't happen without everybody letting go of their ego and getting into it, just getting it done. This is a favorite quote too. All things that are fundamental, all things that to the human spirit are most profoundly significant, can only be experienced, not expressed. So again, thank you for pausing with me about place, and I'm really looking forward to some of your questions.
Great, thank you. We do have questions coming in. Again, folks, you can ask them by entering your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar on the right of your screen. First question. It looks like you've done most of your work with developers. Could you talk a little bit about working directly with small towns or Main Street groups on placemaking?
Yes, I'd love to. Obviously, having been in Seattle since 1979, I feel like I've been involved in almost every neighborhood of the city. We will go into small communities and try to find out what it is that they're trying to do and help create the kinds of things that will signal a change or turn things around for them. For instance, in Tacoma, we were there kind of before all of their great stuff started happening. And what I did is I sent mystery shoppers in from the East Coast that had never experienced Tacoma, and we literally shopped every single business within the downtown core and wrote up reports not only on their merchandise, but the quality of the space, what they were doing and what the service was about, and did a report, and then held an event at their main theater downtown and gave them the report publicly. And what was interesting is that their self-esteem as a community and what they offered was way lower than what the experience was of the professional teams. And just by giving them back that they were better than they were, or they thought that they were, totally changed the whole feeling of how they were then doing their business. And I think it also changed how the brokers were able to attract, filling some of the vacant space and kind of picking it up. So that's the kind of stuff we like to do. I've been into communities where often the issue is crime, and we'll look at what's going on and what the disconnect is and try to figure out how to heal that situation. In fact, a good example was in Barcelona. We were working on the north end of the city, and it was right next to where the gypsy community had traditionally lived. And as materials would come out for the development, things would disappear. And so we actually went and engaged the community, and when they realized that we were trying to better this place and we wanted to be sensitive to what it was that they were wanting, the problem went away. There was an honor in not continuing to have things disappear. But yes, we end up doing placemaking and wayfinding systems for transit systems, municipalities asking for maybe a rewrite of a district sign code, looking at a retail strategy for how to pull a certain area together, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Next question, how do you reconcile branding and the need for fundraising by institutions with limited budgets?
Branding and, well, it's sort of interesting. I started out as professional marketing of real estate properties and development, and I've never used the term branding in 43 years of being in business because I think it's a shortcut to not being what you need to be. And I understand it if you believe that everything should be commoditized. But I don't think in creating places that we're necessarily wanting to make the place a commodity as much as we're wanting to make it truly delightful, which means you have to be engaged in all of the little details of what adds up to the bigger impression. And it's not so much just calling something something or having a symbol for calling something that. I mean, I'm actually discouraging a part of the business we're in, but I really believe that you can have a great campaign, great identity, a great name, but it doesn't make the place be what it is you want it to be. It has to have all of those smaller considerations. I didn't hear the whole thing on NPR this week, but I guess Edmonton, Canada just did a rebranding, and the rebranding is Edmonton. I think the thing is for them to believe that they can be something else, but it's still Edmonton. So I'm just really careful that we try to encourage a movement towards the small details that build up to the bigger thing, and not to get into the branding lingo. I tell you, I have some of my peers that present and my eyeballs just cross because I don't even know what they're talking about at a certain point, and I don't really believe that they do either.
Okay. Where are the new R&D Flex Industries building that you and your husband developed?
It's in Interbay, and Interbay is just about, I would say it's probably about 10 minutes north of the city between Queen Anne and Magnolia, which are two of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Seattle, and it's near the waterfront. So now, after having worked on that area for 15 years, Expedia is moving in. The cruise industry came in a number of years ago, so we have a lot of tourism, and the whole area, which was desolate, is now actually becoming a new thing. It's not considered to be outside and far away anymore. It's kind of the place in between that and areas that are even further north.
Okay. Your examples, are they funded primarily from private or public funding?
I think the examples I showed today are private. And the reason that I have sort of not done as many public projects is because I have found in order to do what we want to do and to have as much ability to touch as many of the details as we do, that the process in the public just didn't suit me. I did do a lot of public work for many, many years on, like for instance, the Seattle Center, redoing its fountain area and its campus, and also transit systems going through 26 municipalities, trying to determine the typeface that appealed to everybody and understanding that a system communicated better than having sandblasted wood signs in Puyallup and high-polished aluminum signs in the Boeing area. So those are the kind of things that I used to do, and I've moved more towards the private development just because I think we have great experiences with our public representatives, because we can bring things in that help them do what they're trying to do as well, to move their agendas with what they're working so hard on. But it seems to move faster if I could stay with the private money.
Okay, thank you. How are elements of placemaking maintained and kept fresh and exciting?
It's always changing. It's a constantly changing thing that you need to be looking at, and we will often go back and revisit places that we have worked on 10 years later and contact whoever's in charge to let them know, for instance, you know, there's a light bulb in that works and it lights up the halo of this particular part of the facade that maybe you don't know about. We'll actually punch and send them a list of things and ask if they want to know who did the work, or if there was a painting by a local artist. We'll try to see if the artist is still in the area and if they want to go back and touch it up, and try to get people connected to keep the thing changing and moving. And of course, it changes and moves past some of the things that we build as well. I showed you a fireplace that was just built a couple years ago, and it was determined that it wasn't in the right place, so we took it down. We kept all of the parts and pieces, and we will reassemble it someplace else on the site that seems to work better for that particular element. In that case, it was a zoning element. It turned out being too close to a residential building when the code changed that you couldn't have a fireplace as close to the building as it was.
Great. I noticed in some of your pictures, big utility boxes were moved in the after pictures. Are you finding it more difficult to get utility providers to work with you in different cities?
I'm trying to think. Big utility boxes moved. I'm wondering if that's actually the case, or we camouflage that stuff. I will build movable gates and planting things around stuff that's in the public space. Like for instance, right now we're working on a public park, and there's a large utility piece that's next to the side of the main public seating area and a bocce ball court and whatever. But the way that it's camouflaged, you would never even know that it was there, because it's going to be quite beautiful.
Okay, thank you. The next question, someone's from the Bay Area. During construction of Santana Row, there was a major fire. Did that impact your artwork, or had it not been installed yet?
Oh, I'm glad somebody knows that story. Actually, it was devastating. We were 3 weeks out from completion after 6 years of fabrication on the particular building. Anybody who knows that story, I think it ended up being a $200 million fire that burned one building down that was 300 housing units on top of 36 major retailers that were built out, restaurants, retailers, over a parking garage, and it was just unbelievable. The fortunate thing about that building and what's true about the art and the kinds of things that we do with the architectural details is that I literally had trucks coming in from around the country with the artwork that had been created by various people, and they were literally circling the block as the place was burning down. So we sent them to warehouses. We stored the stuff for the next couple of years while they rebuilt the whole property, and then we installed the artwork. But when the fire happened, which was a construction fire where the wind picked up and burned this building down, the embers actually went a mile away and burned another building down. And it was just so unbelievable to have run that kind of marathon, as we all know, where you're working on all the issues, and then you get to the finish line and have the thing just disappear. It was pretty amazing. I remember San Francisco Chronicle called me first here in Seattle and said, "How do you feel about one of your projects burning down?" And I said, "What?" And one of my designers got online and they were nodding their head, yes, there was something going on. I said, "I'm sorry, I think I'm going to throw up." And it turned out that that's exactly what they printed on the top of the fold on the paper. And my client, the next time they saw me, they said, "Well, nice quote." But it was how I felt, so I felt it was the truth.
That's funny, not funny.
I know. I know.
Okay, next question. Some municipalities require major development projects to make a contribution for public art, for example, 1% of the total project cost. But the art that results from such programs is often less than inspired. Are you familiar with any successful programs of this sort? And if so, what practices do they follow to make sure that good design is achieved?
Oh, wow. So I think that probably most of you know that the 1% for the arts actually started in Seattle, so I'm super familiar with it. I am friends with many people who have been the head of the Arts Commission. I am friends with many of the artists that do public artwork. My personal feeling is I think it's fantastic that the money is set aside for these particular large properties that are being developed. I think it's essential. However, I would say, knowing both sides of the story, it's extremely difficult. The process alone, especially when I saw my friends who were doing, say, the transit stations out here, when they got engaged with the community, by the time they were done, there was no ability for them to have the energy or the time or whatever that it took to finish off the projects. And it was just so disheartening to see how their own work got sort of edited down, is what I would say. And I really feel that's one of the reasons I'm working in the private realm, is because avoiding that process and being able to hire the artists who are actually doing work that relates to the place that we're creating makes the money go into the actual piece instead of more of the process. And I don't blame anybody for that. It's just the way that it turned out to be. And so we need to figure that out so that it's a better process for everybody.
Thank you. How do you help political leadership understand that their city, I don't understand that question. I'm going to follow up with that person before I continue on. In your placemaking efforts, how do you ensure authenticity of time and place and avoid mimicking history?
That's a really good question. It's the most delicate line that you can sit on. Is how, one of the things is we don't tell the community what the story is. As we discover what we think the place is and what it is that we think should inspire what the artist might want to know about in what they're doing, we don't tell that story. It's up to the community to feel and sense that it's their own, and the place only becomes real when they arrive. All we can do is predict what they might care about. And so when we're talking to the artists and the people who are working on our creative teams as designers, and when we're asked to come and inspire both the architects, the landscape architects, the lighting designers, the leasing brokers, the development team, what we keep repeating is just what it is that we think that we're doing in that place, why we're doing it, who we're trying to attract, why they would care, and then realize it's not about us anyway. It's about who they're going to be and how they're going to relate to it in the future, and that they will make it their own and they will do what they're going to do. I always get a kick out of people doing furniture plans and parks and things that the chairs can the way that it's drawn on a plan. There's just no way. And I love that. I love that they kick the tires and that things rust and get beat up and whatever. It's just that's part of a real place. It shouldn't be just all light and bright, or that is Disneyland.
Okay, and with this idea of authenticity and avoiding mimicking, the question before, I have it cleared up now. What about, do you see cases where there are communities that are trying to replicate other successful communities and either it works or it doesn't work?
Yeah, it's so bizarre for us because we could work on the West Coast and create something that is so specific to that particular place. Like, for instance, at Santana Row, we created a sculpture that instead of a parking sign, it's a large, you may have seen a large sort of, we call him the Metal Man, and he was DeForest, who actually invented the Silicon Valley test tube, so he's holding the test tube. It's called, the DeForest building, and that symbol has lights coming out of it. So what actually ends up happening is people who are parking have the experience of coming out of the parking garage alleyway and seeing these lights or seeing the sculpture, and that becomes the clue as to where their car is without saying parking. And we like to do that as much as we possibly can, is to have other clues help people find their way or be delighted through a space instead of just pointing them. But I was in Cleveland, Ohio working on a project, and the architects had actually taken a photograph of that and superimposed it on a theater in Cleveland. And they didn't know that our teams had worked on that. And I just, after they did their presentation to the developer, I just said, when we designed that for Silicon Valley, it had meaning. Could you explain to me what the meaning is of putting it on this theater here in Cleveland? And I think they wanted to crawl under the table, because everything that you do has to relate back to that place, or it isn't authentic at all. And it's funny because I was just talking to a friend who's trying to do some economic development for a small city out here in Washington State. And she said when she goes into the communities, they say, well, we could copy this place or we could copy that place, and maybe that's what would make us successful. And we were just sort of smiling to ourselves because I don't think that's actually true.
Thank you. Next question. So with the examples of given of all the private art, was there a vetting process that included the local community, and can you talk a little more about that with some examples?
Yes. One of the things that we do with every property is to become very aware of who's producing what in that community, from sculpture to, like for instance, at Assembly Row, the Somerville community that's just across the highway has a very strong letterpress artist printing art community, and so we have engaged them to do not only marketing pieces but murals. The piece that was under the highway was done by one of the artists from right there. We're always looking for the local talent first and then supplementing it with things that might have to come from other places. For instance, there's parts of the country that don't have a strong sculptural community. Or if you're in Washington, D.C., I think they have a strong sculptural community, but it's a certain kind of sculpture. It's more representational, and if you aren't looking for representational art, then you might have to go further out to find somebody. But we try to engage people who are from there and know it and feel it and can, you know, express it first. That's really important. But there's no vetting process. We actually find them. We don't let them find us.
Are you aware of any good examples of ordinances that require or kind of regulate the realm of outdoor art?
No.
Okay.
I really don't. I'm sorry.
How have any of your installments affected gentrification of the areas that you're working in, if at all?
Well, that's an excellent question as well. One of the things we're most proud of is that there have been predictions, for instance, in the places that we have worked, that certain communities, age groups, types of people would show up. And what I'm the proudest of and have literally sat down and had tears in my eyes is to go to some of these places and realize across the board we were attracting all kinds of people from different economic possibilities to where they were from in the world to, for instance, in Silicon Valley, we had people tell us that we had to do leasing because it was only going to be women that were going to come to this place. And I was there one night where I saw 18 guys with name badges from some computer company walking side by side down the sidewalk, and just had to laugh. And to the point where I've been told, you know, there won't be any people that live here with dogs. And then you go there, and not only do they live there with dogs, but they live there with big dogs. So those are the things that make me happy. And also to see people bring their kids from outside of the neighborhood into these places and allow them to run around and get wet and enjoy the spaces just as much as anybody else.
This is an interesting question. Have you experienced or recommended changes to operating hours of when businesses are open to derive enhanced economic benefits through attraction of more people? For example, the person asking the question says, El Dorado has been doing a good job of revitalizing downtown, but after hours, apart from a few restaurants, the place is dark. So that's kind of an interesting idea of, you know, expanding business hours to keep people moving and in the streets and continuing to activate the places.
Yes, I think whoever asked that, they must know and have witnessed that in places that they're influencing and looking at what's going on. When we will do studies, we'll literally find out what time of day different businesses on the block are open or not open, and what the simpatico is of them getting it together. Like, for instance, if one store opens at 9, but the next store doesn't open till 10, and then you look at the parking meters and the parking starts at 10, and all these different things, you start looking at the texture of the decisions of how businesses run, and if you can get them to realize that it benefits the energy and the attraction of the whole block or neighborhood or passageway because of what other things are happening, those are the kinds of things that actually are the small details that I'm talking about, that more than creating a logo or branding or putting some new banners up on the light pole, those are the kind of things that actually change how a place functions. And we do get very involved in that.
Okay.
I actually get involved in calling businesses and seeing how they answer the phone. If somebody's in a property that we've been around and they're not successful, I want to understand why they aren't successful and somebody right next to them could be highly successful. And so we will look at every possible thing we can to figure it out.
Thank you. I think this will probably be our last question. I was pleased to see that much of your work involves architectural decoration, which effectively creates interest in a place. In contrast, most of what we call public art programs involves paying a lot of money to install a single art piece in a public place, which has limited impact. How can we get public art programs to instead foster the traditional civic art of architectural decoration?
Wow, that is a really good question, and it hits very close to my heart. I think one of the reasons that we are as busy as we are is because, quite truthfully, pretty much most of the architecture that's being developed needs help. It needs, I mean, think about us painting the side of a brand new brick building, but if you looked at that facade, that was going to be the front door to that property for a very long time until the density filled in across the street. And we felt that that couldn't be left the way that it was and be the first impression that you got. So we do try to bring the art to the architecture, or bring the art where it's needed, and not plop pieces down unless the space is looking for an iconic landmarking or some sort of a gathering sort of gesture. Otherwise, we are trying to make sure that it's an experience at, I call it 5 foot and below, that is really toward the people experiencing it more than cars passing by or anything else. And instead of decoration, we usually think about it as more ornamentation in the traditional sense.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question just because I'm thinking of it. Are you involved at all in this new phenomenon of pop-up parks and pop-up spaces and temporary public art? What are your thoughts on that? And have you successfully worked with any of these temporary installations?
One of the things that we showed was a pop-up brew pub that was selling soup in the wintertime, so people were bundled up outside on a construction yard next to the development that hadn't been moving to that phase yet, and it was very successful to the point that those same microbrewery people ended up building a large restaurant in the property in the second phase. Another thing that my husband and I did was probably about a dozen years ago, we started to see the phenomena of food trucks, and we had a large piece of dirt, and we tried to get people to understand where the Interbay neighborhood was, so we decided to ask a a caravan of these food trucks to go out to this neighborhood, and then we posted it with a PR firm to promote it. And we went out to see how they were doing when we put this together, and we were in a traffic jam. And we couldn't figure out why there was a traffic jam going to our property. And what ended up happening is 5,000 younger people on social media figured it out and turned it into an event. And we weren't prepared for it. I mean, we thought we were going to get 100 people, so we only had 10 tables and chairs, or, 100 chairs and 10 tables. And we didn't have any porta potties or anything. And sure enough, it turned into this huge thing, and everybody was having a great time. And I learned my lesson because we got cited by the fire department and the police department, but they could see that we had no way of knowing that this was going to be such a big deal. And it ended up becoming one of the bigger events in Seattle, and has gone on ever since as being these cook-off caravans of trucks coming all the way now from Vancouver and Portland, Oregon to Seattle to show off.
Oh, that's a great story. Great. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So Paula Reese, thank you for joining us today, and I'm just captivated by all the images. I love them all. So thank you for being with us. And Margaret, if you're hanging around still, if you can hear us, thank you to the Urban Design and Preservation Division for sponsoring today's webcast. And as a reminder, you can get a recording of it on our YouTube channel. Just head over to youtube.com/planningwebcast and you can get a recording of it. So again, Paula, thank you, and everyone have a great weekend.
Thank you.